The moment the tiny, brutal message flashed across the gold watch face, a sound died in my throat. Not a sob, but a scream. A sound that, had I let it escape, would have shattered the false calm of Orion's funeral and exposed the grotesque lie we were living. "I am still alive! Trust no one!" The words pulsed in microscopic red light, a neon sign pointing directly at the raw, gaping wound of my betrayal. I was hidden beneath the trailing, sorrowful branches of a great weeping willow in the Richmond cemetery. The smell of damp earth and excessive lilies suffocating me. 2 weeks of genuine, blinding grief, 2 weeks of sleepless nights, and the physical ache of loss had been for nothing. I hadn't been mourning a husband. I had been performing for a dead man's audience. My heart, which had felt like a hollowed-out cavern, now felt like a cage filled with pure, frantic, beating rage. Rebecca, the devoted widow in her expensive black lace, was a fool, and the sheer icy coldness of his command, "Trust no one," meant that every single face watching the descent of the coffin, from the minister to his brother Cyrus, was now a potential threat. My husband hadn't just died. He had abandoned me, naked and vulnerable, into the hands of his enemies, or maybe his accomplices. This betrayal is just the beginning. If you're as stunned as I am, smash the like button. Then, whisper your thoughts below. What kind of secret forces a person to stage their own death and leave their wife in a cage of lies? Tell me your deepest theories and let me know where you're listening from. The realization was a punch to the gut. This watch, his last gift, a bulky vintage heirloom he insisted I wear, was not a sentimental keepsake. It was a dead man's switch. A communication device meant to deliver this specific, crippling blow at this specific, most vulnerable moment. I gripped the watch so tightly the sharp edges dug into my palm, grounding me with the pain. I needed air, but the minute I moved, I knew I would draw attention. Cyrus, with his overly attentive eyes and the possessive warmth of his hand on my back just moments ago, was the first face that flashed in my mind. Was he the no one I couldn't trust? And Orion's mother, Persephone? Her grief had always been more about public performance than genuine sorrow. And her eyes had held a triumphant, cold satisfaction that day. They had hated me for 30 years, and I suddenly knew why. I had been married to a man who didn't exist, a ghost they were all in on burying. I checked the watch again. The message had vanished, replaced by the bland gold surface, but my hands were shaking so violently I had to press them against the tree trunk to still them. The immediate, terrifying question wasn't why Orion had done this, but who I was burying. It had been an open casket wake, a memory I had blocked out with tranquilizers, but now I forced myself to recall the sight. His face was pale, waxy, and utterly still, but it had been Orion. The jawline, the slight dip in the chin, the familiar network of tiny silver scars near his temple from a childhood accident. It was all there. Yet, the message was screaming a lie at me. I realized with a sickening jolt that if he could fake his death, he could certainly fake the body. A cold dread, heavier than any grief, settled in my stomach. The casket, descending into the Virginian earth, wasn't just holding a lie. It was a calculated distraction, a massive, expensive, distracting display meant to convince the world, and me, that Orion Maxwell was gone. I was standing in the middle of a trap, baited with my own sorrow, and the clock was ticking on how long I could keep the mask on. I took a deep, shuddering breath that smelled of wet wood and desperation. My primary objective shifted from mourning to surviving. I had to get away from this cemetery, from the watching eyes, before my composure broke and someone realized the fragile truth I held in my shaking hand. I pushed off the tree, forcing my body into the rigid, controlled posture of the bereaved. Every step back toward the crowd was a battle, a conscious effort to keep the anger out of my eyes and the frantic questions from my voice. When I finally reached the periphery, Cyrus was there, waiting, his eyes dark with an unreadable mix of concern and something harder, colder. "Rebecca, darling, are you all right?" he murmured, instantly slipping his hand back to my elbow, steering me. His concern felt like a lie, a spotlight now. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice a delicate, brittle whisper that convinced him immediately. Just the finality of it all. The words tasted like ash. I let him lead me toward the waiting black car, a symbol of the wealth and shadow my husband had left behind. As we passed Persephone, she paused, her eyes meeting mine for a split second, and in that flash, I saw a flicker of genuine curiosity, a speculative hunger that made my blood run cold. She was watching me, waiting. I gave her nothing, my face a perfect empty slate of sorrow. Sinking into the plush leather of the limousine, the weight of the staged funeral lifted, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. Orion was alive, the world was a lie, and the only person I could trust was the one person who had just betrayed me. The silence of the car felt deafening, but beneath it, the game was already in motion. The ride back to our sprawling, silent house in the Goochland County suburbs of Richmond was a torture chamber of forced silence. Cyrus sat opposite me, his gaze fixed on my profile, occasionally sighing a deep, theatrical breath meant to convey shared burden. His presence, once a benign annoyance, now felt like a heavy, suffocating surveillance. I kept my hands folded in my lap, the cold gold watch a painful, constant reminder of the message. I wanted to scream at him, to grab his expensive suit and demand to know if he knew the truth, if the man he just buried was a stranger. But Orion's command, "Trust no one," was a chain around my tongue. My focus narrowed to the details. The way Cyrus's tie was perfectly knotted, the faint, lingering scent of expensive cologne, the small, almost imperceptible twitch near his eye when the limo hit a bump. Was it grief or nerves? I started sorting through 30 years of memories, searching for the first hairline fracture in the foundation of my life with Orion, the first sign that the man I loved was building a fortress, not a home. Our life had been a series of triumphs: the stunning New York wedding, the move to Virginia, the rapid expansion of Orion's investment firm, the tasteful, expensive anonymity of our existence. But now, it felt like an impeccably designed prison. The memory of the last conversation I had with Orion, just 12 hours before his private jet mysteriously vanished over the Atlantic, was crystal clear. It wasn't a romantic goodbye. It was strangely businesslike, even strained. He had called me from the tarmac, his voice tight and low, the static of the private line making him sound miles away already. He didn't say, "I love you," the way he usually did. He said, "Rebecca, remember the safe deposit key? The one with the emerald chip? You must keep it close. Don't let anyone touch it, not even Persephone." He never spoke about business to me. And the sudden focus on this key, which I hadn't even thought about in years, was jarring. I had asked him what was wrong, why he sounded so rushed, so unlike himself. He'd paused, and in that agonizing silence, I heard a woman's muffled voice in the background, sharp and urgent, speaking a language I didn't recognize. Maybe Russian, maybe Serbian. He'd quickly cut me off, simply saying, "It's all fine, darling. Just a logistics issue. I'll call you from Geneva." He never did. The moment we walked through the massive, custom-made oak door of the house, the atmosphere shifted from public spectacle to private pressure cooker. Cyrus immediately went into supportive family man mode, but his voice was too loud, too forceful in the echoing foyer. "Rebecca, you must rest. I'll handle the calls. I've already spoken to the lawyer, Mr. Hawthorne. He'll be here tomorrow morning to read the will. Everything is under control, dear sister." His use of sister grated on my nerves. It was a fake intimacy he never offered before. He wasn't comforting me. He was taking control. The mention of the will sent a cold spike of clarity through the rage. Orion's death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a massive financial event, shifting billions in assets. Cyrus, who had always been a shadow employee in Orion's firm, stood to gain significantly. The scent of opportunity was thicker than the lilies now. I needed to secure that key. It was hidden, not in the house, but disguised inside a piece of jewelry in a separate vault at a small, discreet downtown bank. A choice Orion had made years ago, saying it was boring and therefore safe. I had to move before Cyrus or Persephone, who was probably already speeding toward the house to claim her son's legacy, could mobilize. "Cyrus?" I said, my voice barely a thread. "I need an hour, a proper shower, to wash off this day. Please, can you just keep everyone away? I need absolute quiet." My appeal to vulnerability worked. His face softened, a flicker of something that might have been pity or relief. "Of course, dear one. I'll make sure no one disturbs you. Take all the time you need." He turned his back, already pulling out his phone, his attention snagged by the next logistical detail of the supposed demise of his brother. I didn't head for the shower. I went straight to Orion's private study. The room that was always locked, always sterile, always quiet. A museum of his cold, calculated success. The air inside smelled of expensive leather, aged scotch, and the faint metallic tang of old money. I walked straight to the hidden wall panel, disguised as a bookshelf, the one only Orion and I knew about. I ran my fingers over the spine of a specific edition of The Great Gatsby, pressed the hidden mechanism, and the shelf slid open, revealing a small, empty safe. Empty. My breath hitched. He had emptied it before he left. The only thing remaining was a single, laminated photograph tucked into the back corner. I pulled it out. It was a faded, grainy picture of a little girl, no older than 4, standing on a dock with a toy sailboat, her face turned up to the sun, laughing. She was beautiful, with bright dark eyes and a smudge of dirt on her cheek. I had never seen this child before. And scrawled on the back, in Orion's familiar, precise handwriting, was a date, 1998, and a single, chilling word: proof. The photograph felt like a burning coal in my hand, instantly making the terrifying message on the watch feel less like a random lie and more like a calculated plan. Proof. Proof of what? This girl, maybe 25 now, had absolutely no place in the carefully constructed narrative of Orion Maxwell's life. He had always claimed his first 10 years of adulthood were spent traveling and consulting before he met me. Now, this faded image suggested a hidden life, a phantom family, perhaps the true reason for his faked death. I slid the photograph into the cuff of my black suit, a tangible secret now replacing the phantom grief. I had to know where this picture came from, and more urgently, what it had to do with the safe deposit box and the emerald-chipped key. The emptiness of the safe was a brutal lesson. Orion never left loose ends. The key was the last remaining one, and it was my only lead. I crept out of the study, locking the door behind me, and found Cyrus downstairs in the vast, intimidating kitchen, barking orders into his phone about the reception catering. He was efficient, authoritative, and completely distracted, which was exactly what I needed. I slipped past him and headed to the master bathroom, locking the heavy door behind me. I turned the shower on full blast, letting the steam fill the room, creating a noisy visual screen. The emerald-chipped key wasn't in the safe deposit box itself. It was hidden inside the setting of a custom-made diamond pendant I rarely wore, one Orion had designed himself. calling it his little star. He had a strange fascination with embedding microchips and hidden mechanics into his gifts. I located the necklace inside the massive walk-in safe, hidden behind a painting in my dressing room. A safe Cyrus hadn't seemed to know about, thankfully. The diamond sparkled with a terrifying innocence. With surgical precision, I used the small, diamond-cutting tool Orion had also left behind. A specialized tool I'd always assumed was for jewelry maintenance, to gently pry open the central diamond's setting. It wasn't just a setting. It was a tiny, spring-loaded casing. Inside, nestled against the platinum, was not one, but 2 keys. The first was the expected small, brass safe deposit key, identifiable by the distinctive emerald chip set into the head. The second was smaller, thinner, and made of titanium, engraved with a single unfamiliar symbol, a stylized viper coiled around a lowercase g. It felt like a skeleton key for a door I didn't know existed. The trust no one message suddenly gained a terrifying weight. 2 secrets, 2 keys. Orion hadn't just prepared for his death. He had prepared for his resurrection, and he had given me the instructions in 2 parts. The sound of a heavy, familiar sedan pulling up the gravel drive jolted me. Persephone. She had arrived faster than I predicted, her vulture-like efficiency on brand. I quickly closed the pendant, placed the 2 keys inside a tiny zippered pocket sewn into the lining of my coat, and turned off the shower. I emerged into the dressing room, the steam still clinging to my hair, just as a sharp, commanding knock rattled the bathroom door. "Rebecca, are you decent?" "It's Persephone. I need a word with you, immediately." Her voice was like ice cracking. There was no sympathy, no grace, just a demand for access to what she perceived as her property. I unlocked the door, meeting her cold, furious gaze. Persephone was 65 but looked 40, her face pulled taut by expensive treatments and her will. She didn't hug me or offer comfort. She launched straight into the attack. "The jewelry. I need the full inventory, Rebecca. And Orion's private ledgers. I simply must know the status of the offshore accounts before Mr. Hawthorne arrives. It is my duty to protect the Maxwell legacy." Her eyes weren't on me. They were scanning the room, assessing the value of every silk scarf and leather boot. "The ledgers are in the study, Persephone. I haven't touched them," I stated flatly, my composure solidifying with the adrenaline now pumping through me. I didn't mention the keys. I didn't mention the empty safe. I was already following Orion's rule, no information out. Persephone's next demand was a devastating gut punch, a direct attack on the life I thought I had built. "And the house, Rebecca. Orion promised this house to Cyrus years ago as part of the family business structure. I'll need you to arrange for its quick transfer. You can take your things and move into the DC apartment. It's smaller, but perfectly adequate for a widow." Her casual cruelty was breathtaking. She wasn't just planning to take the assets. She was planning to erase me, to reduce me to a footnote in the Maxwell history. Her words didn't break me, they hardened me. This wasn't grief I was fighting, this was a calculated financial coup. And I was in the way. "The will hasn't been read, Persephone," I managed, keeping my voice level. "I'll wait until Mr. Hawthorne clarifies Orion's final wishes." "Clarity is expensive, dear, and I have excellent clarification," she sneered, her eyes glittering with spite. She knew she had control, or at least she thought she did. I could feel the invisible threads of Orion's past tightening around me, threads she seemed to be holding. I realized then that my lack of knowledge about his finances, something I'd always viewed as a comforting sign of trust, was actually my biggest vulnerability. Orion had kept me in the gilded cage, safe from the storm, but now the storm was here, and I didn't know how to fly. My silence, however, seemed to frustrate her. She couldn't shake my composure. She finally threw up her hands in disgust. "Fine. Then at least arrange to have that hideous gold watch cleaned. It looks ridiculous on you. I told Orion it was too gaudy. The specific mention of the watch, the very device holding his secret, was a chilling coincidence. Did she know? Or was it just her usual hateful scrutiny? As Persephone stormed out to join Cyrus in the living room, presumably to map out their strategy for the next day's will reading, I slipped back into the study. I had to use Orion's computer, which he always kept disconnected from the main home network, using a small, specialized satellite link for enhanced security. The computer was, as always, locked with a complex biometric scanner. But Orion had once told me, during a long night of technical discussion I barely understood, that in the event of an emergency, the scanner could be overridden by an emotional biometric, a DNA marker linked to extreme, high adrenaline distress. He'd laughed then, saying, "You'll never be stressed enough to trigger it, darling." I looked at the photograph of the little girl, at the proof scrawled on the back, and I pressed my thumb hard onto the scanner. Nothing. I tried again, thinking of Persephone's hatred, Cyrus's pretense. Still nothing. Then, I closed my eyes, and I focused all my 2 weeks of fake grief, all the terror of the trust no one message, and the searing, white-hot fury of his ultimate betrayal into that single point of contact. The computer's screen flickered. The biometric scanner glowed red, then green, and with a soft click, the system unlocked. The screen didn't open to a desktop. It opened to a single, cryptic file labeled "The Last Log, Project Golden Viper." The computer screen, glowing with the stark, terrifying title, was a window into Orion's hidden world, and I felt a nausea so profound it nearly sent me scrambling. The Last Log, Project Golden Viper. The titanium key with the coiled viper symbol flashed in my mind. This was the key's destination. I clicked the file, and the screen filled with densely coded text, dates, coordinates, and financial transfers. It was an encrypted journal, not a business document, written in a strange shorthand I couldn't fully decipher. The first entry was from 3 years ago, detailing the initial transfer of assets into a series of shell corporations based in offshore jurisdictions: the Cayman Islands, Liechtenstein, and a tiny, unnamed archipelago near the Philippines. The money wasn't being laundered, it was being hidden from specific parties, meticulously shielded from every entity that could possibly track it. The entries grew more frantic over the last year. Mentions of the collective became frequent, terrifyingly vague references to a powerful group Orion was running from. One entry, dated 6 months prior, sent a jolt of icy fear through me. They know about the proof. They know about the girl. I have to neutralize the threat before they connect her to me. Must proceed with Phase Alpha, total obliteration of the identity trail. Rebecca is the only viable carrier for the switch. She is seen, but never known. Her grief will be the perfect camouflage. He didn't just use me. He designed my public persona to serve as his escape hatch. The ultimate cruelty was realizing the love I felt was just a part of his elaborate security protocol. I scrolled down frantically, my heart hammering against my ribs, searching for any mention of Cyrus or Persephone. There it was, tucked into an entry from 2 months ago. Cyrus is getting too greedy. He's sniffing around the wrong corners. I've put a firewall in place. His access stops at the regional level. He has enough to be comfortable, but not enough to be dangerous. Persephone is a separate problem. Her contacts are deep in the European sector, and she still holds the original marker. The one I should have destroyed years ago. This confirmed my worst suspicions. They were not just grieving relatives. They were competitors, players in a game I didn't even know the rules of. And Persephone held some kind of marker, a devastating piece of leverage. I had to get out of the house. The will was being read tomorrow, and I needed to use the emerald chipped key to access that safe deposit box before the legal formalities locked down the estate. But the last entry, dated the day he vanished, provided the necessary instruction. The emerald key is the first step. It leads to the means. The viper key is the second step. It leads to the destination. Do not attempt to use the viper key until you have secured the proof. The safe deposit box will have the file. The file confirms everything. Look for the address. The Blue Ridge Overlook. The entry ended abruptly, leaving me staring at a digital void, armed with 2 keys and a single confusing landmark. I grabbed the titanium viper key and the emerald safe deposit key from my coat and shoved them into a small, zippered pouch I wore beneath my clothes. I couldn't risk leaving them. I then wiped the browser history and closed the log, letting the screen revert to the biometric scan. I left the study, and for the first time, I felt a strange, cold strength replacing the fear. I was no longer the grieving widow. I was an operative in Orion's final, deadly plan. I had to secure the proof and get to the Blue Ridge Overlook, wherever that was. I needed a convincing cover story for leaving. Just as I reached the main staircase, Cyrus called up from the foyer, his voice loud and artificially cheerful. "Rebecca, I'm going to run to the office for a final check on the paperwork. Be back in an hour, don't go anywhere." I froze on the stairs. He wasn't leaving me alone, he was giving me a timed window for escape. Cyrus's rushed departure was a gift wrapped in a threat. "Don't go anywhere," he'd instructed, a perfect inverse of what I needed to do. I watched from the landing window as his black sedan sped down the drive. The moment the taillights vanished, I was in action. No time for logic, only instinct. I grabbed a small, nondescript backpack, not a designer handbag, but the old, faded nylon one I used for weekend hikes, and stuffed it with essentials. My passport, an emergency stack of cash Orion always insisted on, a burner phone I'd forgotten I even owned, and a pair of jeans and a plain sweater. The black dress and the oppressive widow's veil went into the closet, a symbolic rejection of the character Orion had cast me as. I was changing roles, from prey to hunter. I needed transportation that wasn't registered to the Maxwell estate. Orion had owned 6 cars, all tracked and expensive, but he also had a secret, a beat-up ancient Ford pickup truck he used only for errands to a remote warehouse he maintained in the rural outskirts of Louisa County. I remembered the location of the spare key, a magnetic box hidden inside the ornamental fountain in the courtyard. I moved fast, my steps silent on the marble floor. I found the key, and within 5 minutes of Cyrus's departure, I was reversing the filthy, rattling truck down the long driveway, the sound of the engine a defiant roar in the suburban silence. It was ugly, slow, and completely untraceable. Perfect. My first destination was the bank downtown. I drove with a singular, feverish focus, the rush of adrenaline overriding the nausea. The little girl's photograph kept replaying in my mind. Who was she? Why was she the key to everything? The Richmond National Trust was an imposing, fortress-like structure. I walked in, heart hammering, but my outward demeanor was composed, an aging woman on a mundane errand. The safe deposit box was in my name, a fact I'd always found reassuring, but today it felt like another clever piece of Orion's design. I handed the clerk the emerald-chipped key, and he led me down to the vault, a deep, silent chamber that smelled of metal and time. The box was small and rectangular. Inside, there were no jewels, no gold, just a single thick manila envelope sealed with a red wax stamp. I broke the seal, a deliberate, irreversible act, and pulled out the contents. It wasn't money or a will. It was a file, densely packed with legal documents, birth certificates, and financial ledgers, all labeled the proof. I rifled through the top papers. The first document was a birth certificate. The name on the certificate was Katrina Vostov. Date of birth, 1994. Father, Orion Maxwell. Mother, Alina Vostov. The photograph of the little girl was her, Orion had a daughter he had hidden from me for over 30 years. The betrayal was so complete, so profound, it didn't even register as pain anymore. It registered as a cold, absolute determination. I wasn't just clearing his name. I was solving a life. The second half of the file was a detailed dossier on a shadowy international organization called The Collective, confirming Orion's last log entry. They were a loose network of former intelligence officers and high-stakes financial criminals involved in high-level industrial espionage and data brokering, and according to Orion's notes, they believed he had stolen their master algorithm, the Golden Viper, and that his daughter, Katrina, was the leverage. The notes were clear. They think I'm dead, but they will come for the proof. Katrina is in a secure location, but only the Overlook address holds the final safeguard. I didn't stop to process the shock. I simply placed the entire file in my backpack and locked the empty box. As I walked out, the bank's security guard looked at me a little too long, a little too closely, and I knew I had to push the pace. The Blue Ridge Overlook was the next step, and I had to get there before anyone realized I hadn't gone home to mourn. I was barely 5 miles out of the Richmond city limits, heading west on I-64 toward the hazy promise of the Blue Ridge Mountains, when the burner phone in my backpack vibrated. I'd forgotten I even had it. Pulling over onto a dirt rest area that smelled of pine and dust, I fumbled with the cheap device. The screen showed an incoming text message from an unknown number. My hands were slick with cold sweat as I opened it. The text was short, curt, and devastating. "The Overlook is compromised. Do not proceed. Your husband's body has been exhumed." The message was a direct counter-command to Orion's last log entry, compromised. The Collective was faster than I thought, or the mole was closer. And the exhumation of the body, the ultimate confirmation that the corpse in the coffin wasn't him, meant the game had changed from quiet evasion to open pursuit. I gripped the steering wheel, the cheap plastic digging into my fingers. Who sent the text? If it was Orion, why couldn't he call? If it was the Collective, why would they warn me away from a place they controlled? The only absolute fact was the exhumation. They had found the fake, and now they knew the truth. Orion was alive, and I was holding the key. I had to assume the text was a lure. Orion had explicitly stated that the Overlook held the final safeguard, the end point. I couldn't risk assuming a random text was more reliable than his meticulously planned last log. I decided to stick to the plan but approached it with extreme caution. The Blue Ridge Mountains were a vast, wild area, a perfect place for secrets to hide. I ditched the slow, conspicuous Ford truck at a dilapidated motel parking lot 40 miles further west, taking only my backpack and the keys. I needed a rental car, something invisible. I found a small, privately owned lot near a roadside diner and paid cash for an aging gray sedan with an out-of-state plate. The moment I started the engine, the burner phone vibrated again. Another text, this one a chilling personal reference. "Persephone knows about the girl. She is heading north. She has the marker." This was the break. Persephone wasn't just after the money. She was after Katrina. The marker must be the leverage that connected Orion to the Collective, and Persephone was using it to find his daughter. I realized the danger wasn't just Cyrus or an unknown organization. It was Orion's own mother, a venomous, familiar enemy. I pulled out the full dossier on the Collective from the safe deposit box. Hidden within the papers was a map, hand-drawn and highly detailed, of the Shenandoah National Park area, specifically highlighting a remote trail leading to a small, abandoned fire warden's cabin marked with a faded O. Beneath the map, Orion had scribbled, "If the Overlook is too hot, the fire trail is the secondary drop point. The Viper key opens the door to the safe." The secondary plan. This felt much more like Orion, always having a backup for the backup. I took the titanium Viper key and the map out, leaving the burner phone and the rest of the documents behind in the glove compartment of the rental, a calculated risk to draw attention away from the real target if the car was found. The drive into the mountains was beautiful, a terrifying contrast of nature's calm against my internal chaos. The roads narrowed, the air grew crisp with the scent of pine and damp moss. I was now operating entirely on Orion's instructions, trusting a dead man's notes more than my own instincts. I found the trailhead exactly as marked on the map, a barely visible track overgrown with weeds and low brush. I parked the sedan deep in the woods, covered it with branches, and started walking. The forest was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy and watchful. I was no hiker, but the adrenaline fueled my legs. I had a daughter I never knew about, and she was in danger from her own grandmother. That fact alone was enough to make me keep moving. The hike was brutal. I was a 50-something woman who spent her life in tailored suits and high heels, not climbing steep, rocky paths. But the thought of Katrina, the little girl in the photo, who was now a grown woman in danger, kept me pushing past the pain. After nearly 2 hours, just as the sun began to dip behind the majestic ridges of the Blue Ridge, I saw it, a tiny, dilapidated wooden cabin, almost swallowed by the dense forest, just like the map promised. The only marking was a faded O, Orion's initial, carved deeply into the lintel above the warped door. I approached with extreme caution, every instinct screaming a warning. The cabin was utterly silent, radiating a deep, cold stillness that meant no one had been here recently. No forced entry, no disturbed dust. It wasn't compromised. I pulled out the titanium Viper key, its stylized Viper symbol feeling cold and heavy in my hand. It was the key to this last secret. The lock was old and stiff, but the titanium key slid in perfectly. With a loud, echoing clunk, the door opened, revealing a single, small room dominated by a massive, old-fashioned wood-burning stove. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of wood smoke and mildew. The room was mostly empty, save for a rickety table and 2 stools. My eyes immediately went to the stove. It wasn't just a stove. It was the safe. The Viper key wasn't meant for the front door. I ran my hands over the cold cast iron and quickly found the mechanism Orion had built into the damper handle. I inserted the Viper key, turned it, and with a silent, heavy hydraulic hiss, the entire front face of the stove swung open like a vault door. Inside was a small, climate-controlled compartment containing exactly 3 items. First, a high-end satellite phone, clearly fully charged and operational. Second, a large, sealed manila envelope labeled in Orion's familiar hand. For Rebecca, open only if you hear the phrase, "The northern lights burn cold." The condition was so specific, so absurdly cinematic, it confirmed my role in his drama. The third item was a passport. I picked it up, feeling the smooth paper and cold leather. The picture was of Katrina Vostov, but the name on the passport was Eleanor Vance. Orion had created a new life, a new identity for his daughter, and the passport's destination stamp was for a small, remote town in northern Michigan near the Canadian border. The puzzle pieces finally clicked into place. Persephone was heading north because she knew Katrina was near the border, waiting for extraction. I grabbed the satellite phone and the passport, leaving the conditional envelope untouched. I had to reach Katrina before Persephone, but I needed a plan. I checked the satellite phone. It had a single contact listed, the pilot. No number, just a connection to another device. I knew then that this was how Orion communicated. I texted the pilot the coordinates of my current location, the cabin, and simply wrote, "Need extraction, immediate, north to Michigan." The response was instantaneous and chilling. Stand by, Rebecca. Cyrus is watching the perimeter. Persephone is 2 hours north of you. She has an armed detail. The pilot wasn't just a contact. He was watching me, and he knew my name. I was no longer alone, but I was still the target. The urgency was a physical weight on my chest. Cyrus was near. Persephone was 2 hours ahead with an armed detail, and I was stranded in a fire warden's cabin. Orion's command to trust no one had just been validated by the pilot's warning. I quickly grabbed the conditional envelope. I couldn't risk leaving it, not with Cyrus so close. I needed to know what was inside, but I didn't have the password. I shoved it all, the phone, the passport, the envelope, into the backpack and prepared to flee. Just as I zipped up the bag, a twig snapped outside, followed by the faint sound of crunching gravel. Too loud for an animal, too close for comfort. I pressed myself against the damp, cold wall of the cabin, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the wood. The front door creaked open, and the late evening light framed a figure. It wasn't Cyrus. It was a man I recognized instantly from the financial papers Orion had stored. Silas Thorne, Orion's former head of security, a man with a reputation for absolute ruthlessness and a frightening loyalty to Orion. He was tall, built like a wall, and his eyes, when they met mine, were cold and assessing. He wasn't armed, but his posture was lethal. "Rebecca Maxwell," he said, his voice a low growl. "Your husband gave me a separate protocol. We need to go." "Why didn't you stop the funeral? Why did you let them exhume the body?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and relief. He just stared at me, unblinking. Orion needed time. He needed the collective to believe they were chasing a ghost, not a body. The exhumation was a calculated risk to draw them out. The man in the coffin was an associate from Moscow with similar physical attributes and no family. He didn't offer comfort. He offered cold, hard logic. "We don't have time for questions. Cyrus is setting up roadblocks. Persephone is driving north to intercept Katrina. We have 2 hours to get ahead of her." We moved quickly out of the cabin, following Silas to a discreet all-terrain vehicle hidden under a camo tarp nearby. As Silas drove with reckless speed down the barely visible forest path, I pulled out the satellite phone. "The pilot," I asked. "Is that you?" Silas gave a curt nod. "One of many aliases. My mission is to get you and the proof to the final extraction point. Orion is waiting, but there's a complication. Persephone isn't just after Katrina. She is the collective's original contact. The marker is a deed, a contract giving the collective ownership of Orion's entire firm should a successor emerge. If she secures Katrina, she transfers the legacy, and they take everything. The web was deeper and more poisonous than I had imagined. "But I have the proof," I countered, clutching the backpack. "Katrina's new passport, the identity. Why do we need the extraction point if she's safe in Michigan?" Silas glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes suddenly intense. "The passport is only temporary. Orion's last safe house, the one he's in, is the only truly secure location, and it holds the leverage to destroy the collective. The safe house is inside a tiny fishing village on the Canadian side of Lake Superior. He needs Katrina to meet him there to finalize the transfer of the Golden Viper algorithm, the one piece of data that can dismantle their entire network." The stakes exploded. This wasn't just about a woman and her money. It was about global financial warfare. I asked the most critical question. "What is the phrase, Silas? The one to open the envelope?" "The northern lights burn cold." "What does it mean?" Silas paused, the vehicle briefly going airborne over a rut. "It means the situation is too dangerous. It means the only way out is through the original plan, no deviations. The envelope contains the keys to a separate, untraceable account, your personal escape fund. If you hear that phrase, it means Orion has failed, and you must run." His brutal honesty was oddly calming. I felt the sharp edges of the envelope through the backpack. I still hadn't heard the phrase. We were still fighting. Silas drove us through the dark, winding mountain roads of the Shenandoah, his navigation precise and unnervingly fast. We were traveling in a silent bubble of urgency, the only sound the roar of the engine and the crackle of the satellite phone as Silas tracked Persephone's convoy. "She is traveling with a private military contractor," he reported, his voice tight. "Heavy equipment. They know we have the file, but they don't know where we are going." We drove until dawn, crossing into Pennsylvania and pushing relentlessly toward the Great Lakes region. The goal was to secure a private jet from a small, discreet airfield near Cleveland, an operation Orion had prepaid years ago under a shell company. I used the time to study the file on the collective and the new passport. Katrina was now Eleanor Vance, a graduate student specializing in ancient languages. Orion had built her a life that was quiet, intellectual, and completely off-grid. The meticulous planning was staggering, but it also cemented his deception. I realized he hadn't faked his death to protect me. He faked it to use me as a courier, trusting that my very visible grief would make me invisible to his pursuers. I finally confronted Silas with the emotional truth. Why me, Silas? Why would Orion do this to me? After 30 years, why not trust me with the full truth? The car was filled with the charged silence of my pain. Silas slowed slightly, his eyes still on the road, the gray light of dawn illuminating his exhausted face. He loved you, Rebecca, in his own way, but his world was too toxic. He knew if he told you, they could break you or threaten you to get to him. By making you the grieving widow, he gave you the perfect, untouchable cover. You had no knowledge, so you had no leverage for them to exploit. The watch was his only way to communicate after the fact when the danger was highest. He didn't betray you. He encased you in the strongest armor he knew, absolute ignorance. The explanation didn't erase the pain, but it reframed the betrayal into a twisted, protective love. It was the grounded, raw human motivation I needed. We reached the small airfield, a windswept, deserted strip of asphalt hidden between cornfields. The jet was a sleek, silver Cessna, waiting with its engines idling. The pilot, a young woman with sharp, focused eyes, simply nodded when we boarded. She didn't ask questions. She just closed the hatch and began taxiing. As we lifted off, heading north over the vast expanse of Lake Erie, the burner phone in the backpack vibrated violently. "Cyrus." I ignored the call, but a text message followed. "Rebecca, stop. The will is a fake. He left you nothing. Come home. We can protect you. Persephone has the real documents." His plea, wrapped in a half-truth about the will, was a desperate, transparent attempt to lure me back. I knew he was lying about protecting me, but the possibility that Orion had left me financially destitute made my blood run cold. Was that his final cruelty, or another part of the plan? I shoved the phone away. I had to assume everything Cyrus said was a lie. Our current trajectory was clear. Northern Michigan, the safe house, and Katrina. Silas confirmed the plan. We land near the safe house. We secure Katrina and then proceed to the main extraction point, Orion. I looked out the window at the endless blue water, the surface shimmering with cold resolve. I was no longer running for money or for safety. I was running toward a daughter I didn't know, to finish the job her father had started. The small plane landed on a secluded airstrip near the town of Marquette, Michigan, the air instantly hitting us with the crisp, clean cold of Lake Superior. We were near the Canadian border in a desolate, beautiful wilderness. The last piece of Orion's puzzle was coming into view. Silas had arranged for a beat-up SUV to be waiting. He was visibly tense, checking the perimeter constantly. Persephone's team is close. The marker she holds gives her a digital footprint to the area. They know she is near the extraction point. Katrina's safe house was a rustic, snow-dusted cabin set deep in the woods along the lakeshore. The approach was silent and tense. Silas covered me as I approached the door and knocked firmly. A few seconds later, the door was opened by a woman who looked exactly like the proof photograph, only older, sharper, with the same deep-set, intelligent eyes. It was Katrina. She didn't look scared. She looked exhausted, tense, and utterly alert. "Eleanor Vance?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "I'm Rebecca. I'm Orion's wife." She didn't react to the word wife. She simply looked past me at Silas. "Are you the pilot?" she asked him in a low, even voice. Silas nodded. "We have to move, Katrina. Your grandmother is close. She has an armed team. We need to get you to the rendezvous point." Katrina stepped back, motioning us inside. Her cabin was meticulously organized, full of books and maps, a clear indication of Orion's influence. "I know. My father left me a final instruction. He told me to wait until someone brought me the Golden Viper algorithm. That's the only thing the collective wants. He hid it in the one place they couldn't track. The algorithm is hidden at the rendezvous point," I stated, pulling out the passport. "We have the new passport. We need to cross the border and meet Orion in Canada." Katrina didn't take the passport. She looked directly at me, her eyes filled with a lifetime of resentment I hadn't earned. "The rendezvous point is a trap, Rebecca. The algorithm isn't there. It's on the watch." My blood ran cold. The gold watch on my wrist, the one that gave me the trust no one warning, was the final hiding place. "The watch is merely a display device," I argued, my mind scrambling to process the new betrayal. "It only gave me a message." Katrina walked over to a workbench, picking up a specialized, sleek magnetic reading device. That's what he wanted the collective to think. But the vintage gold housing is a Faraday cage. It protects the core algorithm, which is encrypted into the watch's movement. He knew I would recognize the specific oscillation frequency. He told me that only someone with absolute clearance and no digital footprint, someone assumed to be purely emotional, would be trusted to carry it across the final threshold. The full, stunning truth of Orion's plan hit me. I was the most expensive, secure flash drive in the world. Just then, the satellite phone buzzed. Silas grabbed it. His face went instantly rigid. "They found the SUV. They're on foot. They're about 10 minutes away." The time was up. Katrina looked at me, a profound, chilling realization in her eyes. "He trusted you with the weapon. Now you have to use it. The last stage is on the watch." The final minutes were a blur of cold terror and hyper-focused action. "What do I do?" I pleaded, looking from Katrina's fierce, desperate eyes to Silas's grim, set jaw. The watch. What is the final step?" Katrina grabbed my wrist, placing the magnetic reader over the gold watch. The tiny screen on the reader flickered, displaying a single, long alphanumeric code. "This is the algorithm," she whispered. "The Viper key opens the final encryption layer. You have to destroy the watch once it's done." "Now!" We heard the distant but unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. Silas drew a small, suppressed pistol, positioning himself at the door. "Go! Now, Rebecca! I'll hold them off!" I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the titanium Viper key and the satellite phone. "Tell me the address, Katrina. Where is Orion's final safe house?" She gave me the coordinates for a small, frozen harbor on the Canadian side of Lake Superior. "He is waiting for the algorithm. Once he has it, he sends it to Interpol, and the collective is finished." I ran out the back door, heading for the frozen lakeshore, a desperate, middle-aged woman running through a cold, dark forest, carrying the fate of a billion-dollar conspiracy on her wrist. I scrambled down the icy embankment to the shore. A small, powerful speedboat, camouflaged by a tarp, was waiting. The pilot, a gruff, stocky man, already at the helm. "The northern lights burn cold," he shouted over the idling engine. The phrase, "The northern lights burn cold." My heart plummeted. Orion had failed. The phrase meant he was compromised, the plan was shot, and I had to run. The conditional envelope. I fumbled in my backpack, tearing open the sealed paper. Inside was not an escape fund, but a single sheet of paper, a signed, notarized revocation of will, dated the day he vanished. It declared the current will fake and named me, Rebecca Maxwell, as the sole, irrevocable executor of his entire estate and all holdings. The final message was a single line of text. "I gave them a fake body and a fake will. Now take my real life and live it, my love." He wasn't waiting for the algorithm. He was giving me everything, forcing me to take over, to survive, to be in control. I looked across the vast, icy expanse of Lake Superior, the distance representing a new, terrifying freedom. I turned back to the shore, ignoring the pilot's frantic gestures. I had the Viper key, the revocation of will, and the golden Viper on my wrist. I wasn't running anymore. I was taking control. I plunged the Viper key into the titanium body of the gold watch, triggering the final destruction protocol. The watch hissed, then violently shattered, sending tiny pieces of gold and microchips into the snow. The algorithm was destroyed, no longer recoverable by anyone. The collective's ultimate prize was gone. I sent one final anonymous text from the satellite phone, a message to the Richmond police detailing the location of Orion's true, verifiable assets and the identities of every member of the collective, including Persephone. I had no interest in revenge, only justice, and the quiet, solid truth. I turned to the pilot and spoke with a calm authority I hadn't known I possessed. "Take me back to Richmond. I have a will to file and a legacy to claim, and a life to begin." As the boat sliced through the dark, cold water, I felt the ice around my heart finally shatter. The widow was dead. Rebecca Maxwell had just begun to live. Thank you for following Rebecca's journey. The plot is resolved, the betrayals are exposed, and the protagonist has emerged stronger and in control. What aspect of Orion's complex, twisted love was the most shocking to you? Comment below with your thoughts.